Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. It was announced just over a year ago now that Paapa Essiedu would be taking on the role of Snape in the upcoming HBO Harry Potter series, and it's been a pretty controversial casting to say the least. In fact, it's gotten to the point where you really can't have a discussion about any aspect of the series without people bringing it up. And up until now, Essiedu himself hadn't actually addressed the backlash. But in a recent interview, he finally spoke out about what he's been experiencing. Today, I want to talk about what he said, but also why this situation has gotten so out of control. Now, with regards to some of the previous videos I've made on this topic, let's just say there were some strong opinions. In fact, the very first video I made got over 3,000 comments, and the basic gist of the conversation was this: people really care about who plays Snape, and rightly so. Alan Rickman left behind some pretty massive shoes to fill, and his portrayal was so iconic that it defined the character for an entire generation of fans. And that's one of the reasons that this casting choice has stirred up so much controversy. When you're replacing someone like Rickman, someone who owned it as much as he did, you can't just cast anyone. But here's another issue. The whole point of the show was to create an adaptation of the story that's faithful to the books, and by casting a black Snape, they've already contradicted themselves. Paapa Essiedu is a great actor, but the problem here isn't about acting ability, it's about accuracy. Fast forward to now, and Essiedu has finally opened up about the backlash, and unsurprisingly, it's had a real impact on him. He essentially acknowledged that the reaction has been intense, emotional, and in some cases crossing a line, and that's the part I want to focus on. Because while I, and many others, have legitimate criticisms about the casting, there's a small percentage of people who are taking this way too far. I'm talking about harassment, personal attacks, and even threats. I do also want to emphasize that because it's really easy for this to get distorted online, it's a small percentage. Probably a tiny fraction of the overall fan base, and a bunch of people that probably don't even care about Harry Potter, but just want to jump on the bandwagon of hate. The overwhelming majority of Harry Potter fans are just having normal discussions about the show, but unfortunately, it doesn't take a large group to create a massive amount of noise, especially online, and a handful of people sending extreme messages can completely skew how the entire fandom looks from the outside. I'd like to be clear about something here and put a line in the sand. You can disagree with the casting, you can criticize HBO, and you can even say you think it undermines the idea of a book-accurate adaptation. That's all completely fair and justified. But the moment this shifts into attacking the actor himself, it isn't criticism anymore. It's needlessly going after a guy that, let's be real here, accepted a role in Harry Potter. Does he know he doesn't fit the Snape description? Yes, I'm sure he does. But can you really blame him for wanting to be a part of such a magical franchise? Some will say he should have turned it down out of principle, and I sort of agree, but I also totally understand where he's coming from. At the end of the day, he's an actor. He got offered one of the biggest roles in television, and he took it. Also, just to reiterate here, my issue with this casting has never been about Essiedu as a person or as an actor. It's about the fact that Snape is a very specifically described character. Snape is described as tall and thin, with long greasy jet black hair framing his pale, almost ghostly complexion. And his most striking features include his hooked nose and cold, penetrating black eyes. And these are important distinctions to be made because Snape's physical description is pretty integral to his whole character. He's a bit of a mess, conventionally unattractive, greasy jet black hair, pale complexion, and Essiedu doesn't fit any of these descriptors. The only accurate aspect of his character is that Essiedu is roughly the right age. I've seen some argue that the physical characteristics of Snape are not well represented in the books, but I completely disagree with this. And if you need further clarification on what Snape is supposed to look like, then look no further than the original Snape illustrations from both Rowling and Mary Grand Prix. Anyway, let's get to Essiedu's comments. In a recent interview, he talked about the kind of messages he's been receiving since the casting was announced. And it's not just people disagreeing with the decision or saying they don't think he fits the role. It's gone quite a bit further than that. He said, "I've been told, quit or I'll murder you." He also then went on to explain that this is not an isolated incident, and that if he opens Instagram, he'll regularly see messages from people saying they're going to come to his house and kill him. I actually noticed when I visited his Instagram page for the first time, right after he announced that he'd been playing Snape, that his comments were disabled. And honestly, that's pretty sad, as all he was doing was excitedly posting about getting the job. He went on to add, "So while I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be murdered, that could age badly, but yes, while I hope I'll be okay, nobody should have to encounter this for doing their job. Many people put their lives on the line in their work. I'm playing a wizard in Harry Potter, and I'd be lying if I said it doesn't affect me emotionally." And I think that's the part that people need to actually sit with for a second, because this is no longer about casting at that point. This is someone dealing with the repeated threats of a fictional role. And again, this isn't representative of most fans, but it only takes a few people doing this for it to become a very real experience for him. I think that whatever your opinion is on this casting, and I've already made mine pretty clear, this kind of response just doesn't make any sense. There's a completely normal, reasonable version of this conversation, which is just fans talking about whether this aligns with the books, whether it fits with the tone of the character, or whether it matches what was originally described. But then there's this other version of it that's kind of taken on a life of its own, where it stops being about the role entirely and just becomes about the person. And once it gets to that point, it's not really about Harry Potter anymore, or adaptation, or accuracy. It's just people being angry for the sake of it. And even if that group is relatively small, they're the ones that end up defining the situation, because that's what actually reaches him. He's probably not seeing the long, thought-out arguments about whether Snape should look a certain way. In fact, I bet all he's seeing is the worst possible version of the reaction, over and over again. And that's the kind of unfortunate reality of the internet sometimes. I will stand by what I said earlier. I don't think this is a good casting choice if the goal is to create a faithful adaptation of the books. I think Snape is one of those characters where the physical description actually matters, and changing that does have an impact on how certain parts of the story come across. But I'm reasonable enough to know that that's a completely different conversation from targeting the actor himself. At the end of the day, he's just been cast in the role and is doing what any actor would do in that position. And again, if you don't like the casting, that's completely fine. You can criticize it, you can explain why it doesn't work for you, and you can even just not watch the show. But once it turns into threats or personal attacks, it doesn't strengthen the argument, it just undermines it. If anything, it actually weakens the position of people who have legitimate concerns, because it makes the entire conversation look irrational, even when most of it isn't. At the end of the day, guys, I love Harry Potter. I've got a whole channel built around it. I want to preserve it more than anyone, but I'm never going to resort to the kind of behavior exhibited by that small, loud minority. Criticize the role? Totally. Send him personal threats? Absolutely not. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed the content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.